What if I told you that our desires weren't as spontaneous or personal as we think? What if I told you that our desires aren't simply sources of lack, but instead are the main driving force behind our existence? And not only ours, but also those of animals, plants, and even objects. Today, we're exploring the philosophy of Baruch Spinoza. Born in 1632 in Amsterdam, Spinoza is considered one of the most influential and radical thinkers of his time. His parents were Portuguese Jews who escaped the Inquisition in Portugal, seeking refuge in the more tolerant Dutch Republic, where they raised him in a devout religious community. However, Spinoza's controversial ideas led to his excommunication from the Jewish community at just 23 years old. He spent approximately 14 years from 1661 to 1675 working on his masterpiece Ethics, also called Ethics Demonstrated in Geometrical Order. However, the book was only published posthumously in 1677. Structured in a highly methodical way, Spinoza's Ethics is divided into 5 parts, each addressing fundamental questions about God, human nature, emotions, and how we can achieve happiness and freedom. This book is unlike anything I've ever read before. It's clear, well explained, and well structured, but it's also dense and challenging, so it might take months or even years to fully grasp and digest. It's truly a life's work. So what makes Spinoza's philosophy so revolutionary? We could spend a lot of time answering this question, but for the sake of this video, we'll focus on what is most relevant to our topic: desire. In the Western philosophical tradition, all philosophers have consistently defined human beings as rational beings endowed with reason. This ability to reason is what separates us from animals and grants us our unique status. Our essence is rooted in our rationality and our capacity to think. From Plato and Aristotle to Descartes and Pascal, this has been the dominant definition of what it means to be human. Then came Spinoza to disrupt this view. For the first time, humans were defined by their capacity to desire rather than to think. He argued that humans are first and foremost desiring beings. Desiring thus becomes the defining aspect of human nature. For Spinoza, the conception of desire itself has to change as well. As mentioned in the previous video, the philosophical tradition defined desire as stemming from lack and deficiency. We see this in the story of the birth of Eros told by Socrates in Plato's Symposium and in Aristophanes' tale of the androgynes in the same book. Both stories reflect the same idea. However, Spinoza completely transforms this conception. He shifts the focus away from lack and places it on human nature itself. For Spinoza, we don't desire because we lack. We desire because we are desiring beings. Our very essence is defined by our capacity to desire. In this view, it's the desire that creates the feeling of lack, not the other way around. Lack then becomes a secondary feeling, a consequence of something more fundamental within us. Desire comes first and precedes everything else, meaning that if we're still alive, it's because we desire. So if our desire doesn't come from lack or deficiency, where does it come from? Spinoza introduces the term Conatus, a central concept in his philosophy, which serves as the source of all our desires. He defines it as everything insofar as it is in itself endeavors to persist in its own being. The endeavor wherewith everything endeavors to persist in its own being is nothing else but the actual essence of the thing in question. In simpler terms, the Conatus refers to the innate drive of every being to survive and enhance its well-being, so to continue living and grow. It's a fundamental force possessed by all entities in the universe, not just living beings. This includes humans, plants, and even inanimate objects. The universe continues to exist because of the Conatus, and this force of preservation comes from God or nature, which for Spinoza are the same. We'll dive deeper into this idea in another video, but for now, it's important to understand that the Conatus is simply the power of nature itself. He says, in the mind there is no absolute or free will, but the mind is determined to wish this or that by a cause, which has also been determined by another cause, and this last by another cause, and so on to infinity. So for Spinoza, nothing is due to chance. Everything is part of a deterministic and rational order of the universe where everything operates according to the laws of nature. So if we think that some things happen in our lives randomly, it's simply because we ignore the cause. For Spinoza, it's due to a lack of knowledge rather than an absence of cause. Spinoza believes that nature manifests itself in every being through the Conatus, and that's what led him to say that man is not an empire within an empire, because we're extremely connected to nature. We're not an independent entity inside of a bigger entity. We are the same entity. We are connected and we are shaped by the same natural processes that govern and shape everything else in the universe. And this connection for Spinoza is the essence of being. Let's take some concrete examples to see how the Conatus manifests itself. So for a plant, It would be the tendency to follow the trajectory of the sun to maximize photosynthesis, or the fact that it can produce defense chemicals to protect itself from humans or animals. And for animals would be the innate tendency to hunt, to feed itself, or to run away when meeting a stronger predator. And for a stone, it would be the capacity to resist external forces that might break the stone or alter its shape or form. And all these examples show that everything has this innate tendency to protect itself and seek survival. Everything has survival strategies. And needless to say that these strategies are not conscious. They are automatic and natural, so that there is no notion of effort associated. Everything is just natural because all these beings want to persist in their being. So now you might ask, how does this conatus manifest itself in human beings? Before answering this question, we must make a distinction between the subtle difference of what Spinoza calls appetite and desire. Spinoza defines appetite as the physical and emotional drive that stems from the conatus and doesn't require conscious thought or reflection. Appetite is the expression of the conatus in a more immediate and instinctual form. It encompasses all the basic needs that push us towards self-preservation and fulfillment, like hunger, thirst, or sleep. For example, when you're hungry, the urge to eat is an expression of appetite. Similarly, when you're in danger, your body triggers the fight or flight response to protect you, releasing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. Same thing when your body secretes melatonin to make you sleep. All these are appetites. However, desire is the appetite plus self-awareness. In other words, it's when we become conscious of our appetite and choose to act on it. It involves a conscious wish or longing for something that we believe will improve our well-being. For example, when you're hungry, choosing to go eat a burger at a restaurant is the conscious expression of an appetite turned into action. Desire is appetite with consciousness thereof. It is thus plain from what has been said that in no case do we strive for, wish for, long for, or desire anything because we deem it to be good. But on the other hand, we deem a thing to be good because we strive for it, wish for it, long for it, or desire it. This means that what we desire isn't desirable in itself. It's our appetite that makes it desirable. For example, if you crave a burger from McDonald's, it doesn't mean that it's the best burger or the tastiest option available at the time. It simply means that your appetite makes you crave it and perceive it as delicious. So at first, you might be attracted to the image of the burger in your mind. But if you eat it and for whatever reason you don't like it, or it simply doesn't meet your expectations, or maybe it makes you sick, then you will lose your desire for it. So that means that the burger was never good in itself. It was never desired in itself. It was simply your appetite for hunger that made it seem desirable and made it seem delicious in this moment. And this shows where our desires come from and how the conatus manifests itself in our lives. With human beings, the conatus has to become humanized. In other words, our appetites need to transform into desires. This means they must be directed towards something and have an incentive or a motivating factor that appeals to our rational side. For example, the instinct to reproduce, to continue our lineage or populate the world isn't necessarily appealing at first sight. This basic need must have a conscious aspect to make it more relatable and therefore more desirable. This is where the desire for love, intimacy, and sexual pleasure comes into play. The need to reproduce is by far the most fundamental drive in the world, making sexual pleasure one of the most intense experiences we can have. Sex is the incentive that will make us pursue the initial need. This is how the conatus is humanized. Desire then isn't a thought or an idea. It's the human manifestation of the conatus. In other words, the manifestation of life itself. For Spinoza, desire is simply what sets our bodies in motion, what increases our power to act. You might ask, why do we even act? It would be abstract to say that we simply act because the conatus is manifesting itself in our lives. So the practical answer would be to experience positive emotions. Here, Spinoza introduces the concept of affects, which are human emotions that he categorizes into two main families, joy and sadness. By pleasure, I shall signify a passive state wherein the mind passes to a greater perfection. By pain, I shall signify a passive state wherein the mind passes to a lesser perfection. When there is harmony between our desires and our actions, we experience joy. This occurs when our desire moves us to pursue the desired object, and we feel joy as a result. It represents a successful expression of the conatus. However, when there is a disconnection between our desires and our actions, we experience sadness. Sadness here reflects a diminished power to act. For example, if you want to meet your friends but feel too tired to go, you feel sadness because the desire remains, but it's not strong strong enough to move your body into action. In this case, Spinoza would argue that you never truly desire to meet your friends, because as we've established, desire compels the body to act in pursuit of that desire. So the sadness felt is a reflection of regret, because your Conatus doesn't truly desire to go meet your friends. So when our desire is encouraged, we feel joy, and when our desire is hindered, we feel sadness. Joy is a desire that increases, and sadness is a desire that decreases. Joy is a sign that we're successfully persevering in our being. It indicates that we're acting in harmony with our Conatus. For Spinoza, this is why joy can never be excessive, because it's the expression of life and vitality. In contrast, sadness is always negative, as it reflects a diminished capacity to live fully. With that being said, Spinoza mentions the idea of emulation based on these affects. This imitation of emotions, when it is referred to pain, is called compassion. When it is referred to desire, it's called emulation, which is nothing else but the desire of anything engendered in us by the fact that we conceive that others have the like desire. Emulation refers to the natural tendency to imitate the desires, emotions, and actions of others. When we see someone experiencing joy or achieving success, we are likely to want the same thing. It's a natural response shaped by our Conatus to imitate what appears to enhance our well-being. Emulation is driven by our affects, and it creates a desire to imitate what we observe in others, not because of the desired object itself, but rather because we perceive that the object brings joy to the person. Therefore, emulation is more a mimetic affect than a mimetic desire. If the Conatus seeks joy and we observe someone experiencing joy from a particular activity or an object, then our Conatus will naturally desire that same thing. For Spinoza, this is part of our social nature, and it can lead to both positive and negative outcomes, such as joy if we succeed in imitating or sadness if we fail. Nowadays, we can see this applied by companies as a marketing strategy. When Nespresso uses George Clooney to represent the brand, the goal is to trigger a mimetic affect in the audience. People admire Clooney's success, charm, and status, and by associating him with their products, Nespresso hopes that consumers will desire the product not because of its inherent qualities, but because they imitate Clooney's desire for it. If you watch any of their ads, not a word is said about the quality, origin, or taste of the coffee, because George Clooney is the main focus. In other words, it's not the coffee itself that creates the desire, it's the association with someone admired or envied. A few centuries later, René Girard developed his mimetic theory, which is similar to Spinoza's concept of emulation, but takes a more radical view of how desires are formed. We will explore this in another video. So what's the practical takeaway of Spinoza's Conatus? In some sense, this shows that as desiring beings, we will never stop desiring. In other words, we are obliged to desire endlessly. This is our essence. So to deny our desires is to deny our essence, and thus deny life itself. The first step toward freedom is understanding the true goal of our desires. The goal is not the object of the desire. Rather, the goal is to grow. In other words, to improve our well-being. The more clearly you understand yourself and your emotions, the more you become a lover of what is. If we understand ourselves, we adopt an active mindset to work with the universe and not against it. This is true freedom for Spinoza. To make it more practical, we will explore in the next video how Spinoza explains the ways we can become enslaved to our passions and then how to overcome them. He details his theory of affects, which we briefly mentioned today, and offers a method to liberate ourselves from negative emotions. In fact, this is the main purpose of his work: to eliminate sadness, enhance our joy, and increase our power to act. Stay tuned for the next video. Thank you for watching.